What's up, friends? Welcome back. Okay, have you ever wondered the max number of individuals an environment can hold? Like, how many bunnies is too many bunnies? All right, so good thing you're watching today because we are going to talk about just that. An environment's carrying capacity, the max number of organisms that it can hold. All right, we're also going to throw in some other environmental topics like social and group behaviors. So, like always, pause, rewind, watch as many times as necessary, and let's do this. Science rocks.
Okay, go ahead and open up your Google Drive or your Spiral Notebook and let's start learning. Copy down these 23 vocab words. They go in ABC order like this. And just come back later and create your own definitions of these words. Remember to always use your own words and draw pictures. Make sure to draw the carrying capacity graph and label that one for sure. So you can pause this if you need to finish writing down the terms. All right, let's talk about population growth stages. So, if we look at this graph, you've got time on your x-axis. Remember, it's what I know, independent variable. So, let's just put some numbers to this so we can read the graph. You're going to start off, at 0. Well, let's say we're going to do years. And we'll make up some data. Let's just go by year. So, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Okay. There we go. And on your y-axis is your population size. Okay, so we're going to start at 0, and then let's say this is in thousands. Okay, and we've got 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 for this top one. So some made up numbers here to enable us to read the graph, okay? Immediately after a population is established in a new area, growth begins very slowly, okay? So it's this first growth that's very slowly. During the first stage, this is known as initial growth. It's this yellow section here. Populations are very small, okay? So if we look at our pretend data here, after 1 year, if we go up, the population of whatever we're talking about here is about 500. Okay, and let's say that's pretty small for whatever's going on. Once a population begins to gain numbers, it enters something called exponential growth. All right, it's this orange area here, and look how fast the population grows. So the organisms reproduce to their maximum potential, and populations grow is like incredibly fast. Okay, so if we look at this pretend data around almost 2 years, if you go up almost 2 years, it went from having 500 of whatever we're talking about to over 3,000 of that species. Okay, so that's exponential growth where it grows at a super fast rate. So, as a population continues to grow, however, the availability of resources, maybe it's food, maybe it's water, becomes more limited. Okay, maybe it's the amount of space. This limits the size that a population can grow, right? So it levels off. This stage is referred to as the steady state. Okay, so even after, 2, 3, 3.5 years, it's still around that little bit over 3,000 mark. And we'll talk about in a little bit something called carrying capacity, and that's where that happens, the carrying capacity. So as a population continues to grow, there might be too many stresses. Okay, too many stresses. So the population may begin to decline, this blue area here. All right, so if you go over to about 4.5 years later, the population went down to less than 3,000. Maybe it's 2,500. Okay, this could be caused by abiotic, non-living factors such as climate change, or biotic factors such as maybe increased competition or maybe disease in that area. All right. So if this decline continues, the population may eventually disappear from that community altogether. Okay, that would be known as extinction, this purple phase at the end. So a little bit after 5 years, oh my gosh, extinction. Okay, so I mentioned something called carrying capacity. All right, populations of organisms cannot grow indefinitely. Okay, they are limited by factors in their specific environment. Maybe it's food, maybe it's water, maybe it's space. So the carrying capacity is the max number of individuals of a population that that particular environment can support over a period of time. All right, so you would look at this pink line right here and go over and see what number the carrying capacity is. So say maybe this matches up to the 4 for the 4,000 species. That would be the population size, its max number, its carrying capacity would be maybe 4,000 if that was where it matched up to. Okay, and it usually fluctuates up and down around that number like that. And I also mentioned these factors, okay? They're called limiting factors. They're resources that limit a population's growth. These factors can be resources that the organisms need in order to live and that are present in maybe limited quantities. Or they could be things that limit the growth of a population in other ways, such as population's rate of reproduction or maybe the presence of a disease. So these limiting factors that make the population size level off, usually around its carrying capacity, can be abiotic, remember non-living things, or biotic, living limiting factors. So maybe pause this and try to come up with a few examples of each. All right, abiotic limiting factors might be, so abiotic is non-living things that could limit a population's growth. Maybe the availability of sunlight, of light. Okay, maybe that limits a population's growth. Maybe there's not enough sunlight. Or water, H2O. Maybe there's not enough water to support that many species. Okay, so those are both non-living abiotic limiting factors. Biotic limiting factors, maybe it's a competition for food. Okay, and it can be living food. Think food chains. Okay, so that would be something living, food, that would limit a population size. So competition for food with other predators, or maybe a low reproductive rate. Okay, so these are abiotic and biotic limiting factors. All right, let's go and talk about some behaviors. All right, let's start off with social behaviors. They're very common among members of the same species. They include courtship behaviors, territorial behaviors, and nurturing behaviors. So, a courtship behavior is the behavior of an adult of a species that is intended to try to attract a mate of the same species. So, some birds, such as this chickadee here, can make a unique vocalization to attract mates. All right. Territorial behaviors are behaviors that animals exhibit in an attempt to defend resources that they need, such as space, food, or maybe access to mates. So, animals may fight or do some posture threatening to defend their territory. All right. Nurturing behaviors can include, parents or relatives looking after or protecting their young, maybe providing food to babies who cannot yet get food for themselves. So this baby baboon is being held and protected by its mother. And a little bit about group behaviors. Many species exhibit group behaviors that allow members of the population to work together and increase their odds of survival. So these dominant females lead the elephant herds, and these fish will travel in schools for protection. As always, make sure to watch these two videos sometime about population ecology and human population growth and take more notes. Practice questions. All right, number 1. Theoretically, living organisms are capable of producing populations of infinite size. However, this never occurs because population sizes are limited by what? So pause this and look it over. All right, even though living organisms are capable of producing populations of infinite size, they are ultimately limited by organism interactions and behaviors like cooperation and competition. Okay. The availability of resources such as food, water, and shelter, and environmental conditions, which in turn may be affected by natural causes like tornadoes, fires, floods, or even human causes like pollution or deforestation. So I think we mentioned all of these environmental conditions, organism interactions and behaviors, and the availability of resources. So for number 1, we would go with D, all of these. Number 2, examine the population growth graphs below. Which graph shows a population in which the death rate consistently exceeds the birth rate? Okay, consistently exceeds the birth rate. So the death rate is higher than the birth rate. Okay, if the death rate is higher than the birth rate, then the population size should be going down. Okay, if more organisms are dying than are being born, then the population size should be going down. So let's look at our graphs here. They all have time on the x-axis for independent variable, what I know, population size all on the y. So that's all good. We want to be looking for a graph where the death rate is exceeding the birth rate. Okay, so the population size should be going down. Okay, the only graph where the population size is going down is D. As time goes on, the population size is decreasing because the death rate is exceeding the birth rate. Number 3, almost no species ever reaches its biotic potential, the population size that the species could produce if all individuals survived and produced offspring. Anything that prevents the species from reaching its biotic potential is called a what? Okay, what's going to prevent it from reaching it? What's going to limit this? All right, what are those factors? All right, so pause this and see if you can figure it out. So generally, the population size of a species in an ecosystem is kept in check by biotic and abiotic elements called limiting factors. So B for number 3. Number 4, Jamie's biology teacher gave him an assignment to study growth of dandelion population in a field outside of the classroom. Jamie counted the number of dandelion plants on the first day of the month for 6 months and then recorded his results in a chart. Okay, so here's the 6th month. At month 1, there was 1 plant. At month 2, there were 3 plants. At month 3, there were 27 plants, and so on. So, which graph correctly represents the population growth based on the chart that Jamie made? So pause this, look it over, and see which one matches up the best. All right, the dandelion population Jamie is studying is growing at a near exponential rate. Look, it starts at 1 and it increases like crazy after 6 months. So, since growth patterns of this type are represented with a J-shaped exponential J-shaped curve, it looks like W is going to be our best bet. So, W lines up with answer choice D. Number 5, I put this one on here because it is so long. And just a reminder, when you're doing questions like this, take the time, okay? It's not a race. So read the entire question, take notes if you need to, look at the graph, look at all the answer choices. It's worth it to slow down and take the time. So, number 5, the red squirrel is a species of tree squirrel that can be found in parts of Europe and Asia. In an experiment, a researcher introduced small populations of red squirrels to 2 different ecosystems at the same time. One of the ecosystems was a large nature reserve. The other was a city park that was about 1/4 the size of the nature reserve. The graph below shows the red squirrel population in both ecosystems over 3 years. The graph shows that while the red squirrel population was higher in the nature reserve, it's the blue, than the city park in the red, the city park still had a carrying capacity significantly more than 1/4 that of the nature reserve. Here's their carrying capacity where it levels off. So, which statement could best explain why the carrying capacity of the city park was higher than expected? So, pause it, look over your answer choices, and let's see what we think. All right, the city park is 1/4 the size. Remember up here, the city park is 1/4 the size of the nature reserve, but its carrying capacity is significantly more than 1/4 that of the nature reserve. Okay. The researcher determines that the carrying capacity of the park is unusually high when compared to the nature reserve. One explanation for the increased carrying capacity of the city park could be that it contains fewer natural predators of the red squirrel than the nature reserve. Okay, it's a park. So, decreased predation would allow more squirrels to live and reproduce in the park than otherwise could. So, if you look through your answer choices, that would be C. Number 6, the diagram below shows a food chain. All right, the energy from the grass is transferred to the rabbit. The energy from the rabbit is transferred to the weasel. The energy from the weasel is transferred to the fox, and then you've got it decomposed with the fungi level. So, which population would most likely increase? Which population would increase if the weasel population was removed from the food chain? All right, so pause this and look it over. So, the number of organisms at each trophic level is dependent upon the number of organisms feeding on it. All right, so the rabbit numbers are limited because they are a food source for the weasel. So, if the weasel was removed from the food chain, okay, remember the weasels eat the rabbits. The energy from the rabbit is transferred to the weasel. So if the weasel was removed from the food chain, and the weasels are the animals that eat the rabbits, then the rabbit population would most likely increase. So that is going to be C. Number 7, this graph shows the population data for frilled lizards in an ecosystem. A dingo is a type of wild dog that feeds on these frilled lizards. So, which segment of the population curve shows dingoes feeding on the frilled lizards most actively? Okay, so you're going to go by which section by month. So pause this and see what you think. Which segment of this population curve shows dingoes feeding on the frilled lizards most actively? All right, so during the time when dingoes are feeding on frilled lizards most actively, the lizard population is going to what? Decrease. Okay, if the dingoes are eating the lizard population should be decreasing. Okay, so the segment of the graph representing months, let's see, where does it decrease? Months 15 to months 20 shows the sharpest decrease in the number of lizards. So we would go with D for this one. Last one, number 8. The graph shows population data for 2 species. We've got species 1 in blue and species 2 in red with the squares. What can be said about the relationship between species 1 and species 2? So pause this, read these over, and see what can be said about the relationship between these 2 species. So this graph shows that as the population of species 1 increases, as the population of species 1, we're in blue, as it increases, the population of species 2 in red does what? It decreases. So as population in species 1, as species 1 population increases, species 2 population decreases. So this might imply a predator-prey relationship maybe between the 2 species. So the other possibility is that the 2 species are maybe competing for food or other resources as they would if they were trying to occupy the same niche. So let's look at our answer choices, and it looks like A. When the population of species 1 increases, the population of species 2 decreases. Okay, after you feel like a pro in carrying capacity and organism behavioral interactions, then you should be able to create a project or presentation or experiment over all of this. So do it and let your teacher know how amazingly smart you are.